All right, guys, welcome to Lecture 6G. This is going to be the first presentation in this elective series. There will only be two presentations talking about how to read and write in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, to get started, I'm going to kind of contradict myself. You may recall in Lecture 4, we said that the Egyptians didn't really have an alphabet, and that was true. But in this presentation, we're going to learn the Egyptian alphabet. And you may be saying, hang on a minute, right? You just said there is no alphabet. Well, technically the Egyptians did not have an alphabet, but what we've done is we've taken their symbols and we found those symbols that are the closest to sound and style to resembling our own alphabet, and we've made an alphabet for ourselves. So this is not really something that the Egyptians necessarily would have recognized, but it's certainly something we recognize. So we've essentially made an alphabet out of their symbols and language. They did have symbols that represented sounds, but as we're going to see, it's a lot more complicated than that. You'll see what I'm talking about here. Just to get us started, I wanted to decipher this simple set of hieroglyphs for us here. This is Shesh Kemet, the writings of the Black Land. Now, Shesh is the first hieroglyph here. This is the hieroglyph of a scribe or writings. Here you can see the scribe's pad. This is what scribes would use to write. And then we have the scroll here at the bottom. And then these symbols here read as Kemet, which in Egyptian means the Black Land. This hieroglyph representing a town or a city, perhaps a country in place. And then we have Kemet. So this is a biliteral KH or KE. And then we have M and T, so Kemet. So the writings of the Black Land. This is how you would say Egyptian hieroglyphs in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, as ironic as that is. So here we have the Egyptian alphabet. Now, I should point out, as I mentioned before, right, this is something we've created using what we know of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, it's important to mention that you may see variations on this. I just recently bought a book that's a practical guide to Egyptian hieroglyphs, and their version of this is slightly different. There's some symbols in there that we haven't included, so you'll likely see variations on this, but most commonly, this is the kind of pattern that you'll see most people work with. This is not really an alphabet. These are just the most common phonetic symbols that we know of that resemble what we would think of as an alphabet, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through these and we're going to learn to understand how the different symbols in Egyptian hieroglyphs work. So to just get us started, what I have to do is I have to introduce these three categories. This is very important. In fact, this is probably the most important thing to know when you're trying to understand Egyptian hieroglyphs. The first thing is that there are phonetic symbols. These are really symbols that resemble what we would think of as an alphabet. So you have, for instance, single sound phonetic symbols. So, for instance, N, right, we see is the water sign. R is a mouth, right? These are symbols that can be summarized as a sound, just like R, N, T, U, V, right? In addition to that, we have what are called biliterals and triliterals. These are symbols which can contain two or perhaps even three different sounds. So for instance, we could go back and talk about this symbol right here. This is a crocodile skin, and it can represent two sounds, K-E, right? Kemet. So you've got two different sounds represented in this one symbol. There are also triliterals, where you have three sounds. In addition to this, you have what are called determinatives. Now, what these are they're basically symbols that help to clarify the meaning of a word. So, for instance, here in this case, we have the word weapon. We have W-B-N, and then we have this little symbol for the sun right here. And what this tells us is that this word has something to do with the sun. Weapon means shining, right? Or so, for instance, here we have the word Ra, R-E, and then the little sun symbol tells us that this has something to do with the sun. In this case, it is the sun. Or, for instance, with this word Pet, which means sky, we have P and T, and then this little sky determinative tells us that it has something to do with heaven, right? The third type of hieroglyph that you will see are ideograms, and these are pictures of the literal objects which take the place of words. Now, this is really the most primitive form of language. Really, when writing gets started, it starts as ideograms. So we can kind of see how Egyptian hieroglyphs really played an important role in the emergence of writing. It's felt by many people that the Phoenicians, the people who invented the alphabet, really took their ideas from the single sound phonetic symbols that we find in Egyptian hieroglyphs. So they recognized, hey, wait a minute, we can eliminate the determinatives, we can eliminate the ideograms, and we can eliminate the biliterals and triliterals and simplify all of our writing down to just single sound phonetic symbols. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, so on and so forth. A, B, C, D, right? So in the most primitive form of language, ideograms are pictures. So in this case, we have Niwit. And you can see this is the picture of crossroads, two roads meeting one another. And of course, where two roads meet, you generally have a town, right? A trading center. And it ends with the phonetic symbol for T. And then the most important of all is this little ideogram stroke. And you can see that it's on every one of these symbols. And this is how the Egyptians marked an ideogram. So if you're reading Egyptian hieroglyphs and you see a word and it has this little stroke next to it, you know that in this word is the picture of the thing that's being described. So for instance, here with the word Akhet, we have the horizon depicted. In this case, with the lake, with the word for lake or pool, we have an actual picture of a lake or pool, right? So in actual fact, hieroglyphs are not that bad, right? They're not that hard to get your head around. It's a very practical language, but the only thing that gets complicated is that, we're talking about a span of 3,000 years, and there's many different words and many different symbols, and you guys will see what I mean in a little bit. So for this presentation, what I want to mainly focus on is helping to familiarize you guys with these single sound phonetic symbols, the alphabet, if you will. This is the most, the most basic thing that we have to know. These are the most commonly used symbols. So for instance, we have the sound A or A, and is represented by the Egyptian vulture. You can see it here pictured to the right. And here on the left, you'll see this little symbol here. Now, this is going to be significant towards the end. If you're making notes or if you happen to be drawing these, I would write this next to your symbol, because this is the symbol that we use to enter Egyptian hieroglyphs into JShesh software that will allow us to write in Egyptian hieroglyphs on a computer. So if you're interested in doing that, this is going to come in handy. I just wanted to mention as well, it's kind of fascinating, but actually these vultures in Egypt are quite endangered right now. They're very, very rare. So whenever you see this hieroglyph, you can think of that bird. B is foot or leg, which is represented here, D58. You can see it pictured on the right. C is placenta, and you can see it pictured here. This is the hieroglyph AA1 and pictured on the right. And again, I want to mention, if you guys are drawing these or writing these down, feel free to pause the video. I will try to take my time going through this and not go too fast so that you guys have a chance to, scribble these down in a notebook if you'd like. Then we have D. D46 is our JShesh number. And here you have the hieroglyph itself represented with a picture on the right. Then we have E for arm. D36 in our JShesh software, and you can see the picture of it on the right. Now, sometimes I will mention the E hieroglyph, the arm hieroglyph, will be shown like this. You'll see it holding different things. So, for instance, if you see the hand holding a rod, this is neket, and it means to oppress or to overpower. You'll often see this hieroglyph depicted alongside pharaohs who are announcing their power over their enemies. Similarly, you'll see an arm holding a holy scepter or a magic wand. This is Jesher, and it means holy. Or most commonly, you will see an arm holding a little cone of incense, like depicted here. Or you may just see the cone of incense on its own, and in both cases, this means to give. So this means to give a gift to the gods. So for instance, when we looked at our Hotep Dina Su prayer, it says, may the king give a pleasing offering to such and such a god. And more often than not, you'll see it represented by this little cone. This is an ideogram representing a cone of incense. F is the horned viper, I9. And it's important to mention that if you see this hieroglyph at the end of a word, that's to say as a suffix, then it means he, his, it, or its. This is something that'll be a little more significant later on. But for now, it's worth marking down. So this is generally seen as the or the hieroglyph that will represent he, his, or its. Then we have G for a jar stand. This is W11 in our JShesh software. And you can see here on the right, it's describing this base. And in the ancient world, they would build these large vases, large water containers, and they would have round bottoms so that they could stand up in the sand. But when you brought it into the house, you needed something to put it on. And so they would stand it on a jar stand. And these little triangular cutouts were designed to allow cool air in to keep the water cool. And that's the idea there. So then we have H, which is a reed hut. These are little reed huts that would have been used by farmers in the ancient world to stay cool in the sun. So when you get tired and the sun's beating down on the fields, you climb inside of one of these, you can take a break. This is 04 in our JShesh software. H again is twisted flax. Now this would be a bit of a softer H than the H before, hence I put it into a lowercase. Now twisted flax is a sewing tool. It's something people used in the ancient world to sew various things together, and this was one of the ways you could store it. You could twist it up into a nice coil like this. And so one of the things I could mention is if you want to draw this, just follow my mouse pointer. The best way to do it, Bob Breyer teaches this, and it does work. If you try to do the whole thing at once, you're liable, it'll be all crooked and look funny. But if you start here and you wrap around and you just go to here and stop, then you come back and you start here and you wrap around again, and then you finish it by coming up here and wrapping around the third time. So it's 3 steps. You start 1, 2, and 3, and you'll get this nice straight up and down look. Makes it a little prettier when you write it into your notebook. Of course, this is V28 in our JShesh software. Then we have the reed leaf, which is I, or I should have put it in here, it can also be Y. Usually when it's a Y, though, it will be doubled like this. So you'll see it doubled, and this makes a Y sound rather than an I sound. Of course, this is the top of the flowering structure of a reed leaf, right? You can see the seeds hanging over, resembles this shape. And we have M17. If you're going to draw this, it's a good idea. Just start down at the top and then work your way down and then fill in the rest. That's usually the easiest way to draw that one. Then we have DJ. Now you can render this as J or J. Phonetically, that's how it will sound. It's represented by a cobra. Now, more often than not, when you see this hieroglyph, it will be in combination with either the hand or this Jedu staff here that we have, and this means to speak or to recite. So more often than not, when you see this hieroglyph, it has something to do with speaking or talking. That's not to say it always does, just when you're reading Egyptian hieroglyphs, 9 times out of 10, when you see it, you'll see it in this context. This is, of course, I-10 in our JShesh software. Then we have K, which is a basket with a handle, V31 in our JShesh software. And on its own, as a suffix, it can mean you or your. So if you find a word and it has this on the end of it, it's saying that you or your did this action or your possession, whatever the case may be. Now this one is kind of interesting. This is L for lion, but this hieroglyph was really only used in the Ptolemaic period under the Greeks, and that's due to the fact that the Egyptians didn't really have an L sound in their language. And so it wasn't until the Greeks arrived that they needed a symbol to represent the letter L. This is E23 in our JShesh software. And again, you'll only really see this in the Ptolemaic period, in the Greek period. So if you see an inscription that has this lion in it, especially in the name of Ptolemy, that may in fact be the reason why they had to invent the hieroglyph, was to fulfill the role of this L right here in the middle of the name of Ptolemy. And of course, he was the Greek king of Egypt after Alexander the Great. Then we have M for owl. Now this is a very important hieroglyph. In fact, if you're writing hieroglyphs, as I was doing my course through Bob Breyer, you get kind of tired of drawing this owl over and over and over again. It's a very broad hieroglyph. It was used for many different things. It's G17 in our JShesh software. And it's very commonly used because it means in, from, out of, as, or of. So you have to look at the context of the sentence to see where it's placed to figure out whether or not it's fulfilling any of these roles. Usually, if you see this word in the middle of or if you see this hieroglyph in the middle of a word, it's just rendered as M. So it doesn't mean any of these things down below. But if it's in between two words, then you can judge it as being one of these meanings down here at the bottom. And then we have N for water. This is another very common hieroglyph. You'll see this over and over and over again in inscriptions. And it can mean when standing alone to a person. But again, it has to be alone. It has to be outside of any other word. When you see it followed by 3 strokes like this, it can mean we, us, or ours. So if you see the water sign and 3 lines below it, that's what it's referring to. It's turned this into essentially a pronoun. When you see it in 3 like this, it turns into an ideogram, and it'll generally be associated with this word, iteru, which means river. So if you see the 3 strokes all on top of one another, that's a way of thinking of it as having been changed into a bit of a determinative, or perhaps even an ideogram, where in which it's rendered to be a river or water, literally. This is N35 in our JShesh software. Then we have Q3, which is P, a woven mat. You'll see this fairly commonly. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult. You could confuse it with SH, which is a slightly longer square or a longer rectangle that's meant to represent a pool or a lake, perhaps. And you can see it's representing this over here. And in fact, we know this represents this because sometimes the Egyptians would draw these hieroglyphs in great detail, and we can see that they would draw a reed mat in the place of this square. Then we have Q for hill, which is N29. Sometimes you will see this rendered as a K sound. In different alphabets, people will render it as a K instead of a Q, but phonetically it's the same thing. Then we have R, which is a mouth, D21 in JShesh. If you see this R sign with the ideogram stroke below it, it means a spell or a mouth or an utterance, right? So it's taking the hieroglyph as a picture of what's being described. So it's a spoken word or perhaps a spell or a statement. When it stands alone outside of a word, it could mean to a place. So that's worth marking down as well. Then we have S, which is a folded cloth. And you can see here on the right, just like a towel hanging over a towel rack. This is S29 in our JShesh software. If it appears as a suffix on the end of a word, then the hieroglyph means she, her, it, or its. When combined with N in three strokes, it becomes sen, which means they, them, or their. And you can see an example there. So if you see the folded cloth in combination with these other hieroglyphs, then that means they, them, or their. Then we have the infamous loaf T. I say infamous because you see this one a lot. It's a very common hieroglyph, and the T here is to feminize. So if you see a word with a T on the end of it, then it has feminized the word. So as in the case of ak and aket, aket is the feminized form of ak, something we talked about at length in this Lecture 6 series. This is, of course, X1 in our JShesh software, and you'll see this one quite commonly. So, for instance, in the case of the word servant, which is bak, maidservant is baket, right? Then we have W or U. This is another really common hieroglyph. You'll get tired of drawing this if you work with hieroglyphs. Lots of birds, lots and lots of birds. This is W or U sound, and it's G43. It's just very commonly used hieroglyph. You'll see it a lot. The Egyptians seem to have a lot of words with a W or U or sound. Then we have Z. Sometimes you'll see this even rendered as more of an S sound, but it's a door bolt, and it has a sexual connotation. It's this phallic symbol, O34 in our JSHES software. So standing alone, it can really mean man. So for instance, in this case, you can see there's the hieroglyph for a man here. This is an ideogram determined by our stroke. You can see the Z sign standing above him. It's a door bolt, holding a door together. So you may see the Z standing alone with the man, and this means man. If it comes with a loaf T, and perhaps this determinative, it clarifies it to mean woman. So this is the feminized form of man. Or if we're talking about people, you'll see the determinative or the ideogram for man and the determinative or ideogram for woman followed by 3 strokes. And this means people. And it's pronounced rechu. Sometimes as a suffix, O34 can mean I or mine. Not very often, though. I can't honestly think of even one time I've seen it actually used that way, but theoretically it could be used as I or mine. Then we have SH. Now this is really our first example of a major biliteral, a symbol that accompanies 2 sounds. So in this case it's S and H, N37 and JSHES, and it's simply a pool, a lake or a pool. When depicted with the canal hieroglyph, which is represented here, it means a lake or pool literally. So this is a lake or a pool, determined by the canal symbol and the ideogram stroke. Then we have a tethering rope. Now this would be an example of a biliteral, even though we have 3 letters in here. T and ch are just 2 sounds. So this would still be a biliteral, a 2-sounded symbol, but you'll see it quite commonly. It's a tethering rope, V13 in our JSHES software. As a suffix, the tethering rope means you or your feminine. So the opposite of the K that we saw earlier, the basket with a handle. Combined with the N and 3 strokes, it becomes chen, which means you or your, plural. And then we have here wat, which is the lasso rope. Now, this is significant because this particular hieroglyph evolved over time. You can actually see it depicted up here in this example. In this case, we have P, T, and then here would be wat. Now, in the Ptolemaic period, it was converted to an O sound because, again, like the L, the Egyptians didn't have an O sound in their writing. So to write the name of Ptolemy, they needed to change this wat hieroglyph into an O hieroglyph. So we have P, T, O, L, M, Y, and S, which rendered literally is Ptolemy, right? The Ptolemaeus is the older pronunciation. Ptolemy is more of an English adaptation of the name. And you can see this is our first name of a pharaoh, rendered in the cartouche. In fact, this name was very significant to help Egyptologists with the process of deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. This may have been the first name that was read in Egyptian hieroglyphs in, well over 2,000 years, perhaps, or 1,000 years more likely. So just coming back to our initial slide here, right, we can now look at these symbols and we can familiarize ourselves with some of these terms. So N on its own can mean to a person. We talked about that. R on its own can mean to a place. Ten means this, but it's feminine. Pen is this, masculine. Ki is another masculine, and ket is another feminine. So notice the role of the T in feminizing the words, right? So the masculine form is devoid of the T, and then we see the adaptation as we switch the gender. And we've already talked about these ones. So I'll give you guys a minute, mark these down. These are important words to remember. They're very useful. Now, just to give you guys a really big help when it comes to understanding these things, I want to encourage you guys to download a copy of the Middle Egyptian Dictionary of Middle Egyptian. This is a really useful tool. You'll be surprised how many Egyptian hieroglyphs you can decipher without really knowing the language, just by knowing how to work with the hieroglyphs, how to find their code, and then look it up in the system here. So all of these numbers that we've been talking about, right? We talked about V4 and V13, right? These are how these hieroglyphs are recorded in a dictionary like this. So you can actually break the word down into those codes, and then you're able to decipher the word based on what it means in the dictionary. And so what I've done is I'm going to post a link to that dictionary, but I'm also going to provide you guys with a link where you'll be able to download a copy of this. I put this together just based on what I learned. I found it to be a really useful tool. Originally, I did a hand-painted copy of this, but I realized that wasn't going to be much help to you guys. And so I took the time, I spent a few days, and I put this together on Photoshop, and it came out pretty nice. And as you can see in here, you'll be able to zoom in. Right here, you can see I've got this is actually called the Gardner number, the Allen Gardner number, and that's the classification. I've been referring to it as the J-Shesh number, the Gardner number, depends on how you come after it. But this is how the hieroglyphs are organized. But you can see here, on this far left-hand column, I have all the alphabetic sounds that we've just went through, but then I have people as well. And sometimes these will be used as an ideogram, sometimes they'll be used as a determinative, right? Even sometimes you may have them where they're rendered as a biliteral or a triliteral. So for instance, this bird up here that has the collar makes the sound ba. And when it's with the K hieroglyph over here, we get bak, which is servant, right? So B-A and K. So if you see B-A, this bird, followed by the K, you know that's bak. And you can search that up in the dictionary, and I'll show you guys that, where you can actually punch those codes in and you'll be able to look up the word. But we'll go through some examples together. Again, I'll post this chart down below the video where you guys can download a copy. Feel free to print it off. I recommend printing it anywhere from around, I would say close to 2 feet wide. That's where you'll get a good resolution, about 24 inches. So just here towards the end, I want to challenge you guys to read our first set of hieroglyphs, right? We've only done one presentation, but we're already going to try and read. And you'll see it's not that bad, right? We can sound it out. Here's our quail chick that we saw in our alphabet. So this is a W or a U. Then we have B and N and our sun determinative. Well, we've seen this word earlier. This is, of course, Weben. So we know that this is it. And we can look it up in our dictionary, G43, D58, and N35. And when we punch that in, we see that we get 7 results. So you go into your dictionary, you hit Control F, or you can even punch up here in one of these options and just click the Find option. And then you can put these codes in, and it will give you the meaning of that word. Here you can see G43, D58, N35. And then they even have N5 in here for the determinative, right? And Weben. This means to shine, to glitter, to appear. So then we have R-E and the sun determinative. Again, this is telling us it has something to do with the sun. And then finally we have M, P, T, and the sky determinative. Now you notice this word right here, P and T, we've also seen this word earlier. This is pet. This means sky. Now it's sitting in, the owl here is sitting in between Ra and pet. So this must mean in or of or from. So really, we can break this down. We can take a stab at translating this now. And if you'd like, take some more time with it. You can go through the dictionary if you want. You can punch these codes in and test your skills. But the translation is Weben Ra Mapet, which means shining Ra in the sky, or the sun is shining in the sky. Right? This is our translation. So you can see it's not too bad. As long as you work with the codes and the dictionary and you take that chart that I made for you guys, right? You can work with the codes, and if you can recognize the hieroglyphs and find it in the dictionary, you should be able to translate most things in Egyptian hieroglyphs. So if you guys are interested in making hieroglyphs on a computer, I would encourage you to follow this link and download a copy of the J-Shesh software. And this software is going to allow you to write hieroglyphs on a computer. So if, you've been going through this and you realize, boy, it's quite hard to sit down and draw these. I'd much rather, just type them out. You can punch in the Gardner code, the code that we described, right? And it will actually search up the hieroglyphs so that you can bring them over here. And then from this window, you can export them onto your desktop as an image. You can even do it as a transparent image, and then you can place it into a photo or into a picture. You can see you can also even type the codes directly into here. So for instance, A4, I type that in, and there's the hieroglyph. So you can use this window here to search for hieroglyphs that are similar to one another. You can even search for them by type, right? What kind of symbols are there? You can reverse the signs. So if you highlight them, you go group manipulation. You can flip the orientation. Here you can see I'm just typing them. So G17, and then I'll type in here, I believe it's R5, yeah, and then we have a word. Now we can even take these hieroglyphs, you can highlight them, you can organize them vertically. The Egyptians really like to organize their hieroglyphs in a nice and tidy, compact way, right? You can reverse the orientation, and then when you're ready, you can go ahead and highlight it, go File, Export, and then you export it as a JPEG or a PNG photo, and then you just put in your name for your file and the size, and then there you go. All right, and that's the end of our Lecture 6G presentation. In the next presentation, we're going to cover some basic grammar. And again, as I said in the previous lecture, this is not meant to be an exhaustive lesson on hieroglyphs. So if you're saying this feels a little overwhelming, this feels like a lot of information, yeah, it is a lot of information, because I'm going to do my best to teach you guys a practical approach to Egyptian hieroglyphs in just 2 videos. I'm not going to take the time to explain this in full depth, right? This is just meant to give you a kind of surface level, superficial understanding so that, Egyptian hieroglyphs are not intimidating. But if you want to go deeper with this, I would definitely encourage you to do so. It's a really exciting thing to learn. So I will post a little quiz down below. Again, this is an elective, so it's not necessary for anybody to graduate, but, might as well. I mean, you're here, right? Do the practice quiz. I'll make it fairly short. We'll just throw a few examples in there. And yeah, we'll see how you guys do. And as always, thanks for watching.